So let's have an early morning soapbox. I hope you guys are doing okay this morning. There were several shows that I wanted to play catch up on and get in before we get the show started today, so I'm not going to stay too long on this particular video. But I did want to address something that is taking place currently that I think some people who may be liberal or some people who may be Democrats may be confused and not quite understand why Trump's approval rating is continuing to go up. I will give you my hypothesis on why this is taking place, and I think it's rather straightforward. Right now, we're in the midst of a coronavirus epidemic. Now, the Democrats in the Senate was holding the line against basically a corporate giveaway, and they've just agreed upon a $2 trillion bill. Now, the President of the United States, the Senate Democrats and the Senate Republicans have agreed on this particular bill, so it looks like it's going to get passed today. Now, this is going to be effectively money, like $3,000 going to families all across the United States, in addition to various provisions to help businesses, supposedly with restrictions and everything else. Now, we haven't had the ability to see the bill yet. We're not going to see it until later today. But nevertheless, supposedly that's going to get passed and people are going to start getting checks soon, hopefully. I mean, after all, rent will be due next month. This is the outbreak in the United States. As you can see, clusters in the various places. Now, the reason why you're seeing these clusters has to do with density. Now, when people are making this argument about social distancing, they're making this argument because the further away, the less likelihood you have of spreading it. Think for the moment if you had a place where a lot of people were, just by definition of the number of people that you have in a particular given space, those people have a higher chance and higher probability of either having it and spreading it if they do have it, as opposed to few and far between of people kind of bumping into one another. In densely populated areas, the numbers have a tendency to go up. When you're listening to like Spain and Italy and some of these other countries, you're talking about densely populated areas. Right now, this is New York. California has been shut down, and thousands of these cases are showing up every day, and we have little to no test coverage in regards to knowing how many people are actually coming down with this condition. This is an emergency by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, for fuck's sake, we're talking about a universal basic income, and you have Republicans that jumped on board for this idea of a universal basic income. Trump has mishandled this flagrantly so. The loss of life that we're going to experience as a result of Donald Trump's actions and as a result of his current malfeasance is going to be in the thousands or millions. And right now, it doesn't necessarily seem that that's going to be abated by any of the decisions that are being made. Despite this being an emergency, despite all of these people's lives being at risk, despite all of these people's jobs and livelihoods all being at risk, the President of the United States is out here saying stuff like this. He's engaging in these type of theatrics.
John, go ahead. Dead. What do you say the Americans were scared, though? I guess nearly 200 dead, 14,000 who are sick, millions, as you witnessed, who are scared right now. What do you say to Americans who are watching you right now who are scared?
I say that you're a terrible reporter. That's what I say. Go ahead. I think it's a very nasty question, and I think it's a very bad signal that you're putting out to the American people. The American people are looking for answers, and they're looking for hope. And you're doing sensationalism, and the same with NBC and Comcast. I don't call it Comcast. I call it Concast. Let me just, for whom you work, let me just tell you something. That's really bad reporting. And you ought to get back to reporting instead of sensationalism. Let's see if it works. It might and it might not. I happen to feel good about it, but who knows? I've been right a lot. Let's see what happens, John.
Can I get back to the science and the logistics?
You're going to be ashamed of yourself.
I love that last part. You should be ashamed of yourself. I had to add that part because that part just makes it that much more special. He's just berating the guy. Basically, Donald Trump is giving a suggestion on supposedly this idea of some kind of cocktail that may or may not work. There's nothing to back it up other than anecdotal evidence. There's been a person who's already died as a result of taking Donald Trump's advice on this stuff. So take that with a grain of salt. Trump has also been lying flagrantly, meaning What he just said there, where he's going after the reporter, this is in the context of this country being ill prepared, Trump not even directing companies to go out and do the job, and many of these companies, drug companies, gouging us in regards to the scarcity of these particular items. The reality of it is expressed Governor Cuomo. Listen to what he's saying. Fact of the matter is, this is not an issue of hope or anything else. This is an issue of policies in order to ensure that we are covered, meaning the population is made whole, and we collectively come together in order to deal with something that's a national emergency. That's the issue. Who does government work for? What does government prioritize? Sanders has been prioritizing human beings. Donald Trump has been prioritizing businesses, and again, engaging in those type of theatrics. The reality of the situation is we are massively ill prepared. Listen to Cuomo.
I've been very clear. I have an immediate problem on the equipment for this wave that is happening. PPEs, gowns, masks, most important are the ventilators. And there has been no response. There has been no response. And that's why I said right here, looking at the camera on your show, to Secretary Azar, he has to be responsible here. Tell me where I get 30,000 ventilators, because, Christopher, people will die who need a ventilator.
He's basically making the point that I don't have the supplies that I need. Meaning, for all of these rosy projections, Donald Trump downplayed this virus for months. He knew, based on intelligence briefing, that it was coming along, and yet he downplayed it. They consistently downplayed it. And then finally, he made an about turn, and all of a sudden acted as if they were on a war footing. So we got to send people checks, we got to send people money, realizing that the economy was going to hit the skids. Now, the reality of it is, despite him downplaying it, what Cuomo just said here is right. They don't have the things that they need. And not having the test kits, not having the supplies, not having the gowns, not having the masks, and then not directing the country itself to produce those things, well, you have shortages, you have lack. Trump, for all of his protestations as if he's doing something, the mismanagement is the thing that is going to cost lives. What he just said is what governors are dealing with, not the nonsense that Donald Trump is talking about and the theatrics that Donald Trump is engaged in. The person who is being probably the most adult and most straightforward on this issue is just Sanders. Between everybody, he has made this strident argument that people need to be made whole. We need to ensure that the public is made whole, and not just the public is made whole, that they aren't stuck with bills, they aren't stuck with incentives that would push them to go to work and implicate other people in this particular illness. We need to do things that are rational in the context of not industry, but us as human beings. And we need to work together to do that.
From happening.
Rational actor, if the person wasn't trying to screw people over and they just was looking, hey, what's the rational choices we need to make in order for us to get through this with less people dying as fast as we possibly can to flatten the curve of infection.
History will judge us. If we are a greedy pharmaceutical industry who thinks you can profit off of this moment, history will judge you. And I will do everything I can as a United States Senator to prevent that from happening. History will judge.
And they are doing that. But it is the responsibility of government to point out and to not allow that to take place, right? Especially if these guys are coming out with their hat in their hands, or they're trying to find some way to profit off the misery and what amounts to a pandemic or a crisis. Question. Why is Donald Trump winning this media blitz? Listen to what I'm asking you. Why is Donald Trump winning this media blitz? If Donald Trump is mismanaging this as bad as I say he is, then why is that not translating into people realizing how bad he is handling this particular issue? And to put it further in context, right now, the Republican Party has come up with two things. Bernie Sanders was able to get an employee provision that he pushed through into the bill in the Senate. It appears that Bernie got his unemployment provision into the Senate bill, 100% of salary for laid off workers up to $75,000 a year, and benefits to include tipped and gig workers who are usually not covered. Again, the guy who is not winning the race is the guy who is continuing to lead on this issue and is still getting his policies pushed through these bills. Right now, Donald Trump is coming up with a platform, and this is my point. In the context of what I'm about to show you that Donald Trump is talking about, and in the context of what the Republican Party is arguing for, Donald Trump is winning the media blitz in regards to this issue. Right now, the worst thing that you could do is end social distancing with the idea of kicking up the economy. And yet, that's exactly what Donald Trump is doing. And this has nothing to do with advice he's getting from his scientists. This has everything to do with economic concerns. Millions of people would die as a result of this policy. But Trump already understands this and is potentially going to go through with it anyway. And again, this is the White House winning the politics of this issue.
We spoke to him today, and I was telling them that we have two things to look for. Don't forget the doctors. If it were up to the doctors, they may say, let's keep it shut down. Let's shut down the entire world, because, again, you're up to almost 150 countries.
Said it's likely going.
Did you see Barr's response? Did you see Barr's response? I mean, if it's up to the doctors, we shut down the entire world. Why? Because the doctors are concerned with the transmission of the illness, and with the more transmissions of the illness, the more people are going to die. If you're talking about something with a 1% or let's say even a 2% kill rate, you're talking about millions of people dying, and doing so for economic concerns. Just so we're very clear, in case you don't believe that Donald Trump, that this is an issue of death, life and death, and that the Trump administration doesn't know this, listen to Republican Lieutenant Governor in Texas. Listen to the argument that he's making about people going back to work sooner rather than later for economic reasons.
Living in fear of is what's happening to this country. And, you know, Tucker, no one reached out to me and said, as a senior citizen, are you willing to take a chance on your survival in exchange for keeping the America that all America loves for your children and grandchildren? And if that's the exchange, I'm all in.
Are you willing to take a chance on your survival in order to keep the economy the way the economy is? In order to keep these oligarchs making all the money in the world that they can make, in order to keep them making 95% of the income gains, in order to keep these industries in place, in order to keep our society and get it back to normal, where all of these people make huge amounts of cash and everybody else is exploited? Are you willing to take a bullet? Are you willing to die for the economy? That's his argument. He even goes and says, I'm not saying that I'm brave or anything. No, I think you're a psychopath. You're literally making the argument that millions of human beings should die so other people can continue to make their profits. That's astonishing. Nobody is arguing that this is going to take place forever. Nobody is arguing that this is going to be the prevailing modus operandi going forward for the next 10 years, or that it's sustainable for the next 10 years. But you can take excessive action in the short term in order to flatten the curve and get up production to the point where you can accommodate the virus itself. That's competent leadership. That's effectively what Sanders is talking about in regards to policy. That is not what Donald Trump is doing. And again, this gentleman and the Trump administration at this point is arguing that people dying is acceptable if that means getting the economy up and running. And nevertheless, despite the fact that that is literally what they are arguing, death, because, you know, hashtag dollars, Trump is still winning the political battle over this issue. Let's briefly talk about it, and I want to explain my hypothesis as to why. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. This is an early morning Soapbox. After this, I'm going to have to start getting prepared for the other show. But I definitely wanted to talk about this because I think it's a fascinating topic. And I think some people are looking at this shocked and not quite understanding why the world, meaning from the standpoint of the United States, is not looking at Trump's incompetence with the anger and the venom that it deserves, especially since they are literally talking about something that is not real, meaning profits, juxtaposed against something that is life and limb of human beings. And let's be very clear, this is not just the quote-unquote boomer illness, which in and of itself wouldn't justify allowing this particular policy to go forward, but 40% of the people who are adversely affected are kids, are younger people, at 20 to 50 something. Let's just be very clear. The policy that Trump is putting forward is death. And yet, you have this question. What do you think of Trump's handling of the coronavirus outbreak? CBS News poll, 53% good job. 53% good job, 47% bad job. And again, this is an administration that is taking a policy that is potentially going to get millions of people killed. That's not hyperbolic. That is literally what we're seeing from the standpoint of the trend line in Spain and in Italy and what it's going to look like in the United States because of how ill-prepared we are. Let's keep going. Right here. Trust more to handle the coronavirus outbreak. President Donald Trump, 45%. That's up 6 points. Democrats in Congress, 39%. 39%. Americans approve of Trump's management. Do you approve of or disapprove of Donald Trump's handling of the response? This is an ABC News poll. 55% approve, 43% disapprove. Put that in context. Put that in context. Everything that I've said here is absolutely accurate. I can show you Larry Kudlow making the argument that we're going to have to make tough choices. Those tough choices being people's lives versus economic output. And he's taking all of these polls over the Democratic Party. This one even goes so far as to say Trump 45%, Democrats 39%, 53-47. The question becomes, why? Isn't that peculiar? If Trump is doing so bad, why? Why is this so low for the Democrats and yet riding so high for him? I strongly suspect that the answer to that has to do with this. Now, Bernie Sanders has been a competent actor on this notion of the COVID-19 thing. He pushed Medicare for all. He was calling about healthcare. Even though he wasn't necessarily originally pushing for the UBI, he immediately flipped to the UBI, totally on board for it. So he has been a rational actor. However, the Democratic Party has been trying to get rid of Sanders and wrap this race up because the last thing they want is Joe Biden falling on his face and Sanders in some kind of weird backdoor way getting the nomination. They want this wrapped up. They want this over with. So much so they were willing to send people out to vote in various states like Florida and Ohio and some of these other states. Ohio eventually pulled back. But in these other states where people would literally die as a result of going to voting in those places. And they did this instead of postponing the vote. So that gives you the level of depravity that the Democratic Party is willing to stoop to in order to get Joe Biden over the finish line. Sanders, the person who's been talking right about this, has been relegated to the sidelines. Despite him having these speeches, despite him having these daily meetings, yes, he's been on like MSNBC and CNN and whatnot, but for the most part, he has been relegated to the sidelines. Biden was vacant for an entire week. So you have the Republican Party putting out messaging. You have the Democratic Party with Pelosi and Schumer being unimaginative, with the media cycle talking about them being against Trump's plan of sending checks because Trump was to the left of Pelosi on this, just wanting to send checks immediately. You have a situation where when Biden finally does come out after a week, he does a video like this.
And in addition to that, we have to make sure that we are in a position to activate the Reserve Corps of.
That's him losing the teleprompter and is a deer in headlights, not knowing what to do. Yesterday, we had this one.
This is Sarah Haynes. In Hot Topics, we talked about Trump saying the government would reassess the recommended period for keeping businesses shut and people at home. Are you at all concerned, as Trump said, that we cannot let the cure be worse than the problem itself?
We have to take care of the cure. That will make the problem worse no matter what.
We have to take care of the cure. That'll make the problem worse no matter what. My point is this. Whereas Donald Trump, whatever you want to think of him, has been out in front in the public eye. Yes, he was essentially going with this idea of downplaying it before, but at some point he did flip. And when he did flip and the media went with this notion that Trump was trying to send checks and the Democratic Party was against him, it made it look like Trump was doing something. So even though he wasn't putting through the Production Act the way he was supposed to, he wasn't forcing businesses to create the things that we needed, he wasn't acting to prevent price gouging and these type of items, he wasn't getting these guys in line where they weren't playing politics to just issue the checks, something that for the most part everybody understood and agreed upon. No, those weren't the things that was taking place. Trump was doing those things, making it look like he was doing something. Whether or not what he was doing was competent was a secondary question. It looked like he was doing something. The opposition in this case was Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. But Trump is running for office. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer are not running for the presidency. Somebody else is supposed to take that top job, meaning the person who's supposed to be opposition to Trump is nowhere to be found. They've buried Sanders, and Pelosi and Schumer don't have the stature of a president. The person who's supposed to be challenging that president, going mano a mano, is Joe Biden. Joe Biden is nowhere to be found. So as opposed to having two competing viewpoints where you have an opposition with the spearhead of whoever is the be that particular presidential candidate, with the Democratic Party backing that spearhead, giving their opposing view of this is what we want, and having somewhat of a radical vision that goes beyond what the Republican Party is wanting. After all, this is an emergency, this is a crisis, you shouldn't necessarily let it go to waste. And if you are really indeed lefties, this is the time when you try to knock shit out of the park. That's not what they did. That's not what they did at all. For the most part, they agreed with the framing of the world that the Republicans went with, which should, in and of itself, gave you pause if you're the Democratic Party and you're just being somewhat modestly different than the Republican Party. My point is that the reason that the Democratic Party is losing in this argument is because Trump and the Republican Party has been out front, and even though many of the ideas that they've been coming up recently have been pretty bad, they've been out front leading. Joe Biden has been nowhere to be found. And when Joe Biden does come out and says something, he's saying stuff like this. He's off the rails. He's incoherent, barely understand what he's talking about. And yet, this is the person who's supposed to be the focal point of the Democrats' anger, the tip of their spear in regards to going after Trump. So if you want to know why, I would say look here, or start here. There's something else that's a little bit more dispiriting, though. We just came out of a primary process, or we're still in a primary process, where the majority of the population of Democrats chose Joe Biden. And this is them choosing Joe Biden despite them saying he doesn't have any energy, he's not getting the youth vote, he was barely even making money because people didn't necessarily trust him to carry the burden. We don't like his ideas, meaning we think Sanders is better on healthcare, on education, on student debt, on marijuana policy. We think across the board, Sanders is better. And yet, those people still turned around and said, we can't have nice things. And they turned and voted Joe Biden. Think about what I just said. Those people, despite Sanders giving them what they wanted from the standpoint of policy, those people still turned around and placed the vote for one Joe Biden. You've had a Democratic Party that for so many years have had incrementalism, this kind of deadened expectations, that when the public finally actually gets the potential to get what it wants, this kind of glorious emancipatory campaign, the public looks and says, it can't win. Now, their argument about why it can't win has everything to do with just relative distance. There's no there to it. It's all in what the media and what they have been accustomed to for the past 40, 50 years in regards to what they consider to be a Democrat. So the fact that Al Gore lost, John Kerry lost, Hillary Clinton lost, and that Joe Biden is effectively the exact same thing doesn't entirely register because, again, what they consider to be a normal Democrat looks like that. I mean, basically, this is, it's like getting familiar with homelessness or something. It's like, it's not so much that it's normal. It's normal from the way that we engage it. But when you think about how horrific it is, you're talking about people living on the street or people being put in a cage, and we just kind of tick along as if that's perfectly okay. It's not necessarily okay. It's just normal based on a relative distance. Beyond that point, it's possible that the same thing is playing here for Trump. They were willing to put Joe Biden up, despite Joe Biden behaving like this. And because there's no loyal opposition to Joe Biden, you have Trump running the table. Now, right now, Joe Biden, every time he opens his mouth, he's screwing up. He's barely coherent. He's barely getting the message out. And between having somebody who's a focal point like Trump versus not having anybody on the Democratic side, kind of a vacuum, Trump wins it. Now, the catch becomes what Joe Biden and what Trump is getting. The Democratic Party, the party that was supposed to represent the left and is supposed to deal with the hard edges of capitalism, this is supposed to be the party that represents doing big things after all. This is the party of FDR. Well, that party doesn't do that anymore. And their expectations have been so deadened and so drained just based on how small and tiny the imagination of the party has been over the last 50 years that the public, even when given what it wants, still turns around and says no. This is kind of like Carter G. Woodson's miseducation of the Negro, that if you give or show a person the back door long enough, that person will get familiar with that back door, will get used to that back door, and if that back door wasn't available to them, will actually go out to seek and find that back door in order to go on that back door. The public has gotten so just deadened in regards to their expectations that when given the person who they want, they chose to go for the back door and choose Joe Biden. That is so dispiriting. But the same thing could be true from the standpoint of Trump and the way that he's handling this outbreak. Meaning the expectations have been deadened so much, even from the context of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, that the public has very little expectation that the government can even deal with just the basics of a crisis like this. So Trump looking like he's doing something is in and of itself enough, as opposed to actual competence. Now, the catch becomes, does that last if it becomes extremely clear that the decisions that Trump has made is getting people killed and getting people killed in the millions? That part, I don't know. But right now, based on the incompetence and the lack of imagination in the context of the Democratic Party and what it seems to be just deadened expectations regarding Democrats and deadened expectations in regards to the public as a whole, and government doing big things. Just because of so long, government hasn't been able to do anything. You've had two parties, two wings of the exact same bird that for the most part have the same philosophy in regards to life and the purpose of government. If your government can't do the job now, then what's the point? And if accountability means anything, don't you have expectations of them to be more than just a placeholder? This is when the placeholder thing comes into play. And Joe Biden, unfortunately, is not up for the task. Darren Levy, great to see your face again. Jamal, no longer see your face on the Sputnik show. Hope your health is doing well. How's Aisha? Darren, she's doing fine. So yeah, we're doing the show remotely, unfortunately. What I think I'm going to start doing is having the show just pump through my channel so you can see me, even if you can't see Bob or anyone else that's on the show. I'm thinking that might be the best way to go through and deal with it. That way you guys can see something, even if you can't necessarily see the way we typically do the show. I don't know when we're getting back to the studio. And so that's awkward. I actually had gotten to the point of getting accustomed to going in and out, getting the subway, getting to the studio, doing the show, coming back, kind of have a routine associated with it. I do enjoy having an extra hour of sleep. Didn't necessarily help last night. I haven't been to bed over the last couple of days. But yeah, it's just awkward. I prefer going to the studio. I'm a better person when I have to get up. Marcus Will, is there anything Bernie Sanders could have done, like, say, winning the nominee, or do you just want to ignore the political process of winning in favor of virtue signaling? I don't know what you mean. Is there anything Bernie Sanders could have done, like, say, winning the nomination? Or, well, I mean, hopefully he was going to try to win the nomination. or just ignore the political process of winning? Well, I told you before, my issue with Sanders and the way that he was running the process was that Sanders was so wrapped up into his own ideology that the notion of winning, especially in the context of classifying this stuff as existential threats, existential crisis, everything needs, we must do something that's big and radical in order to fix this stuff. And then to not act in the way that he talks. Like, if I fucked up anything in regards to my analysis of the political system, it's that. It would have never occurred to me that Sanders would have been buddy-buddy with Biden as opposed to actually trying to win this race, especially since the left has languished for the last 50 years. No, to me, this is not virtue signaling. It's, if you want to get anything done in the political process, there has to be some level of accountability. If you're just going to support any random Democrat, then that party, for the most part, will take you for granted. And if you look back over the last 40, 50 years, and lefties are all like, oh, you're taking me for granted, you're taking me for granted. Yes, because you've incentivized that process. The moment that you succumb to this notion of you have nowhere else to go, you're stuck with the blue no matter who, or you must support the party. Look, I am not a Democrat. So the notion that I have to support the party is in the same way of saying I have to support the Republican Party. I don't have to support either. I am neither of those things. Now, other people may fall into this notion of blue no matter who. What I would make the argument to you, if you want to get anything real and legitimate accomplished, there has to be political accountability. Meaning you can't get folded into this notion of fear-based politics. Part of the reason that your party is so unimaginative right now, part of the reason that this notion of deadened expectations right now is because blue no matter who has reigned for so long that the notion of actually holding political leaders accountable and expectations has been off the table. So now you have a crisis where you actually need people who are competent, and you end up with Joe Biden and Donald Trump. The race to the bottom. My suggestion is if the left wants to get anything accomplished, that Sanders' plan and policy should be to reorient his campaign to focus on using his campaign as a nerve center for thought and action in regards to pushing forward an agenda, followed by policy concessions. Meaning these are the things that I want if you want my support. Yeah, I back you, but my supporters have things that they want, they care about policy, and these are the things that we're going to push and back and draw a line in the sand on it. Yeah, he's already given over his support. By the same token, by drawing the line in the sand, in and of itself, you've drawn a circle around that very specific issue where his supporters are not going to let that go. Meaning there is a power politics that you can play in this process if your name is Sanders, especially if you really did believe that Joe Biden was better than Trump and you wanted to get Joe Biden in. The best way to do that, the only way to do that, is to try to get policy concessions from the Democratic Party. Otherwise, you're going to go empty-handed and try to browbeat your people to go and vote for Biden. And I hate to tell you, this is going to be just like 2016. At least that's my opinion anyway. Fahal Al. Oh, thanks, man. Thank you. All right. I'm going to end this. Like, share, subscribe, and I will see you guys later today. It's funny, I'm feeling myself starting to drag ass. This is the time where I need to be waking up. But I'll see you guys later this evening. Typical time, 12 to 2 on Political Misfits. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks all.